Welcome to the Effortless Mindfulness Podcast. I'm Loch Kelly, and today I'm excited to share my dialogue with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Dan Siegel. Before we jump in, I want to quickly tell you about a new opportunity to train with me in effortless mindfulness. I'm offering a 6-week course called The 5 Levels of Mind to learn the map, methods, and markers of effortless mindfulness. This is a unique experiential series that I've really enjoyed putting together that will help you overcome obstacles and give you tools to access an advanced yet simple form of embodied non-dual meditation. And even if you can't make this course live, you can take it at your own pace. So you can head over later to my website, lochkelly.org, to learn all about it, and I hope you'll join me. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Dan Siegel. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks for having me, Loch.
Yeah, it's so funny how we met a couple years ago. I know I remember that one of our colleagues and friends, Diana Winston, sent us an email that we were teaching at Garrison Institute. And then we scheduled a time to have a meal on kind of the second day. But by the time we met, all of our students had met in the common dining room and had asked me, said, "Can you see if you and Dan could teach together?" And I said, "My students are asking if we can teach together." You said, "Well, my students are asking if we can teach together."
It was beautiful. Yeah, it's like a two-way communion, through our common friend and through our colleagues, our students. It was beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, I remember that very well. That was a lot of fun, and that was the beauty of spontaneity and seeing the synchrony of independent things coming together.
Yeah, so really beautiful, and I think our students just loved the sameness of some of the model, and then the different languaging and creative approaches that allowed a fuller meal.
Absolutely. No, it was fantastic. Really, really great.
Yeah. So, I would love to, dive deeply into some of what you're doing. And maybe you could start us off by saying a little bit about interpersonal neurobiology and what that is and kind of any of the uniqueness of that.
Absolutely. Well, interpersonal neurobiology is just a phrase signifying this kind of community of people that are trying to construct a framework to explore reality that initially began by looking at the very distinct fields of science, Western science, like math and physics and chemistry, biology, psychology, anthropology, sociology, linguistics, all those different fields that work independently of each other, and then see, was there a common ground? And that was a long time ago, 30 years ago. And so in the course of the unfolding of that field of basically a framework for understanding reality, like seeing the whole elephant view, like from the old Indian fable to the blind men, we said there is a whole elephant there, even though individual disciplines study one aspect of it. So then we started finding that people in contemplative practices were very interested, people in the arts, in music, in the studies of religion, spirituality, all these different ways of understanding the mind, really, and what mental health could be seen as. So that's what the field of interpersonal neurobiology is. We have now over 75 academic textbooks that I've overseen the publication of, and mostly written by other people. I've written a couple of them. And so it's a framework for understanding reality.
Yeah, I think one of the terms that maybe you could define that help people get a sense of it is the difference between mind and brain.
Yeah, well, Locke, that's one of the biggest starting places for our field because, since the time of Hippocrates, 2,500 years ago, the grandfather of modern medicine, if you will, people said, well, the mind is simply a word we use for brain activity. The mind is what happens inside your head. And in my own training, first in pediatrics and then in psychiatry, it just seemed like part of a much bigger story that people weren't talking about. And So that began the journey to bring all these different disciplines together, say, what is the mind? What is the brain? And are they in fact the same thing? Are they related to each other? What exactly is it? And so what happened was we were able to find a way of describing the brain, but no one had a definition of the mind. And the group wasn't going to meet anymore. And so I said, well, will you come one more time? And I had to come up with some kind of offering to these 40 scientists that were in the room that said, look, what if we just, as a starting place, say the mind is this? How does that feel for you? Could you start at least one more meeting after this one? And I came back after a week of really reflecting on it and then offered a definition of the mind that no one had any definition. So it wasn't like it was competing with their definitions. They had lots of descriptions. And that definition then was accepted by 40 out of 40 scientists, which by itself was an amazing moment. It was 30 years ago, almost to the day now. And so I said, wow, let's see if we can collaborate across these different disciplines and find new insights that comes from the synergy of working together. Mm-hmm. And we met for 4.5 years.
Wow.
This one group, really just saying, what is the mind? How does it relate to the brain and culture and relationships and all that kind of stuff? And, since then, it's been exciting to use that definition to explore things like consciousness, things like what you do, and then invite everyone in wherever they're doing, mental health professionals, educators, parents, all sorts of folks in the spiritual traditions to come together and say, there's a lot of work to do on this planet. There's a synergy of what we need to do to try to, get rid of social injustice, to get rid of, environmental destruction. And all of these involve the mind creating these problems. So the good news about that is that the mind, if it created it, as sad as that is and as guilty as we can feel, the mind then can be used to actually put ourselves on a different course. So that's what we hope to contribute in our human family to the journey to well-being in every aspect of life on Earth.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's such a fascinating synergy, and so great when a group like that can come together and go deeply into something and move along an agreement with nuance. Yeah. So
Exactly.
Can you say something about even the brain and the body and the mind and the body, that even I know some of your distinction about it, the brain not being in the head.
Yeah. Well, there you go. So let's start there. So, when we use the word brain, usually people are signifying, this spider web-like network of, fundamental cells of the brain, which are called neurons, and they're supportive cells called glial cells. And, these neurons are a part of a web inside your head for sure. But as the neuroscientist Antonio Damasio says, your head brain is actually the third brain. The first two brains are the network around your intestine and the network around your heart. Yeah. And in fact, the head brain is in service of the other two brains, but it's the only one with linguistic language. So it has the audacity to call itself the brain, when in fact there are two prior brains that it's actually trying to serve. So that's the notion of the brain, that it's, basically an electrochemical energy transformer. If you had to summarize in a simple phrase, that's what the spider web-like set of, we call it PDP, parallel distributed processing is PDP. It's a PDP network. And what we now know about PDP networks is they can learn. Even inanimate ones can learn. Not like your computer at home, which is serial, it's linear, but a PDP computer is super expensive, but it learns.
Yeah. So the implications for both psychotherapy and for consciousness studies and meditation, my experience is that people who can drop from their head center into being fully embodied or into their heart space or their hara or dantian or belly brain feel more whole and more connected to their environment as well.
That's beautiful. Yeah, exactly. And when we talk about that whole system, people, of course, respond to words we say. So I have a phrase that just feels like it says exactly what you are beautifully saying. It's just called the embodied brain. And it means that essentially, and this gets to the next phase, is that the electrochemical energy flow that is the function of this nervous system that's in your heart, in your intestines, and in your
Mm-hmm.
head, and in fact, streaming throughout your whole body. It's an energy flow system.
Yeah.
And that's a good way of just saying, what is the embodied brain? It's the skin encased energy and information flow. Now, when you start asking questions like, well, how do I have a sense of that flow, the feeling of being alive? Then you realize the subjective sense, the sensation, may depend on that flow in the brain, in all your brains, your embodied brain, but it's not the same as the flow. And let me give you an example. When someone's like in a suicidal crisis and they come to you, and if I'm on the phone and you're a phone suicide prevention line provider, and I say, oh, Locke, I'm so glad I'm talking to you. I'm at the end of my rope. I think I'm going to end my life. I feel hopeless. If you were to say to me with words, Dan, I think the serotonin levels in your orbital frontal cortex are probably a little low right now. And the next thing you know is I'd end my life, because you wouldn't be tuning into my mind. You'd be making statements about the physiological function of my brain. So even if mind were completely dependent on only the head brain, which I'm going to suggest to you it's not, but even if it were, it wouldn't make it the same as it, because if instead you said, Dan, tell me more about that feeling of despair that I can sense you're having, those words would be totally different, because my subjective feeling of hopelessness would be inside of you. So I'd feel felt by you in my subjective world. So mind includes subjective experience, and we know about it through something called awareness. And we process information, the words you're saying, so information processing. And those three are really helpful to articulate the distinction between mind and brain, those three: information processing, awareness, and subjective sensation or subjective experience. But there's a fourth process that was the really key point with this group, which is to say that if energy and information flow is the stuff of mind, that includes, of course, the internal aspect of it, well, skull nor skin are barriers for energy and information to flow. And in a relationship, what we look at is the sharing of that flow, whether it's between a child and a parent, or between two friends or lovers, or in a family, or in a classroom, or in an organization, or in a country, or on a planet. And you can then look at this relational energy and information flow sharing as the inter part of mind. So you have an inner part of mental experience, an inter part of mental experience. And then you say, well, what kind of system is that? And there's a long math behind what I'm about to say, but it meets the criteria of what's called a complex system. And it turns out that in the 80s, the whole study of complexity, or, dynamical complex systems, started emerging. And they realized that, in fact, there was something called emergence, which is the interaction of the components of this complex system give rise to something larger than the elements themselves. So I said to this group that it could be that these functions of the mind, subjective experience, consciousness, and information processing, are emergent aspects of energy and information flow. And there's a certain kind of emergent process called self-organization. And what if we take this fourth facet of mind and actually define it this way? The emergent, self-organizing, embodied, and relational process that's regulating energy and information flow, both within and between. And we went around in the 40 scientists, and we got 100% concurrence that even though they had never made a definition of any sort, let alone like that of the mind, that met with what they had been working on for their life, whether it was an anthropologist or a neuroscientist, and everyone in between. And then we went on to use that definition to say not only what the mind might be, but also what a healthy mind might be. So that's what happened 30 years ago. It was an incredible moment of collaboration, really, and looking at even the synergy, this idea that something's larger than just the sum. When we brought everyone together, there was a synergy arising, and it was just beautiful conversations.
Yeah, I mean, the unique part that, for me, of scientists agreeing is the energy that's not in the skull and body encapsulated form, that they would agree that has some relationship to who I am and to mind.
Well, absolutely. And that's why, the diversity of disciplines included anthropologists, sociologists,
Mm-hmm.
and linguistics folks. So what they would say is that mind is relational. I mean,
Right.
Bateson had said that years ago, the mind is
Mm-hmm.
relational. And what was interesting was that the relational folks really weren't that focused on the inner aspect of mind, and the neuroscience folks were not
Right.
that interested in the relational aspect. So this was basically the whole elephant view, saying they're both
Right.
correct, even though you might initially say, oh my God, how are they going to ever get along? One's saying it's relational, the other saying it's neurological. How could they possibly be talking about the same thing?
Right.
Well, this definition could bridge what appeared to be a gap we could not cross,
Mm-hmm.
but we built a bridge with the definition and then went to deepen that by looking at self-organization. You could then say a healthy mind is a mind that optimizes self-organization. How do you do that? By differentiating and linking is what we're going to call integration,
Yeah.
differentiation, allowing to be different, and then linking them. And then when you looked at the ways complex systems functions, you could show that harmony arose with integration. And if you weren't integrated, you either went to chaos or rigidity. And then the
Mm-hmm.
exciting thing was every mental disorder could be characterized by chaos and
Right.
rigidity as basically impairments to integration. And then so far, in every study that we could ever find, my interns and I could ever find now, when you look at the brain of people with different disorders, they have impaired integration in the brain. And when you look at how their relational function happens,
Mm-hmm.
there's chaos and rigidity revealed in how they're not having integrative relationships. So far, integration as health has stood 30 years of attempting to disprove it. That doesn't make it right, but so far there's a ton of evidence to just support it. That's what we'd say.
Yeah, it brings a couple things to mind that we can go into. I'll start with one of them, which is, kind of going back to working in psychotherapy with suicidal client at one point when I was doing outpatient clinic, and the person was saying, I came in, I felt like killing myself, but I don't think I want to, and so I asked them, well, it sounds like you're of two minds, and they kind of looked at me curiously. I said, where's the mind that wants to kill yourself? And they pointed toward their head and kind of furrowed their eyes. I said, well, where's the other aspect that came in? And said, look, it's more here in my, they pointed to their heart space.
Mm.
And then I asked them, well, who's aware of both of these minds? And they literally lit up from inside. And in some ways, what they did is they went to this awareness that we're going to talk about later. And they said, well, I am. And as they did, their shoulders dropped, their whole body, felt soft. They looked at me in a way that, we both met, energetically, emotionally, and just, had like a let out a laugh, almost like a, like a relief
Yeah,
laugh, and said, oh, yes, as if they realized, as we talk about in psychology, that there's different minds or different selves or different parts of themselves that we can be aware from this holistic integration mind that's
exactly.
embodied and interconnected with the other person across from us.
Yeah. And what did that feel like, if I can ask you, Luck, when that client said, well, I am that one? What did that feel like inside of your body?
I mean, it felt like I'll use a term called "mui,"
Yeah.
which is your term, which
Yeah.
it basically felt like as soon as they said, "Well, it's me," that I
Mhm.
felt like, oh, and I'm me, and we're we,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's
and
so great. How beautiful.
yeah. So
Yeah,
that kind of finding ways to help integration when people get fragmented, and that interesting thing that I think we'll go into a little more is that in some of the advanced meditation systems, we go to this pure awareness, but then from that foundation of pure awareness, there's what's called same taste, which is that the pure awareness arises like the quantum field as particles and waves that are both inside and outside. And it feels like there's a distinct individuality and a unity. and that's kind of the advanced practice beyond kind of a witnessing mindfulness, where you feel you make that first move of observing your body and mind, and then you kind of drop in and find the pure awareness that's arising as life itself.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Well, it's so wonderful to speak to you about this stuff because it's so exciting when there's, what E.O. Wilson would call consilience, which is a word he brought back from the 1800s, which means when independent pursuits come to the same discoveries, then we call them consilient. And in interpersonal neurobiology, we use what now we would understand from Wilson, is the great term. We use a consilient approach. So this would be an example where you were discovering, even in your experience of your client, this perspective that there was this kind of somewhat distinct spaciousness compared to the constriction of I'm going to kill myself, or even a part that says I refuse to kill myself. There's a kind of tightness to all those, but then there's this more spacious something. You see neuroscientists study what they call open monitoring. There's all sorts of ways of sort of getting at the similar thing. In my own journey, what happened in the 1990s after this proposal of, the mind being this self-organizing emergent process came up, then I said, listen, you ought to try to walk the talk with your patients. If integration is health, and that was one consilient idea. The other consilient idea was consciousness seemed to be needed for change. As therapists, we use consciousness all the time. Or as parents, I'm a parenting, educator, as well as just working with people in schools. Students need to be conscious to learn in a certain kind of way. And anyway, so then I said, well, if consciousness is needed for intentional change and integration is health, what if you integrated consciousness? Yeah. So then I had this table that I had sort of designed for feng shui purposes for a new office I had. I was talking to a patient recently who was there in the late 90s when I first designed this table, and she was one of the first people I would bring up from the couch. And I said to her, and then later, others that were going to try it out, I said, let's integrate consciousness. And they go, what are you talking about? I said, well, let's go around this table. And the table has a glass center, and it has a wooden rim, and then there are these metal things, stand. The stand has these metal things that look like a spoke, if you will, of a wheel. No one wanted to call it the table of awareness, so it got called the wheel of awareness. And we said, what if we could differentiate that open knowing space of being aware from that which you're aware of on the rim? And then we put all the different things we could name basically as forms of energy flow that were coming from either outside the body, like sound or light or, smells or tastes or touches. And then we would go inside to energy flow inside the body on a second segment. And then we'd walk through, even things that were about the way you had mental life, like thoughts and memories and emotions and meanings and intentions, hopes, dreams, longings. Maybe that's dominantly in the skull-based head. That could be. And then we would go from there to actually a fourth segment of the rim, that one being the third, and we would explore relationships. And then as people went through this, it was amazing to see that they felt a kind of clarity start to emerge. And I didn't understand why. And then, collaborating with my patients, what we tried to do was take the spoke and bend it around right into the hub itself. Yeah. Which for some people in those early days, back in the late 90s, it was like they felt this transformation, kind of like what you were describing about that being lit up. They would go, oh, wow, there's this kind of timelessness. They would say things like, it's empty but full. I felt like I was with eternity. Or later when I teach it to students who are therapists, or even later on in workshops, I did it actually with 10,000 people in a series of workshops, and then another 40,000. So I got recordings from when people would do it on what their experience was. So I have 50,000 people, literally pre-pandemic in-person workshops. And it was amazing to find, no matter what a person's background in meditation or, which I guess is what people would call this. I called it an integrative reflection practice, but later I would learn about meditation. And if meditation means training the mind, and that was training the mind to become integrated. no matter the person's nationality or religion or
Mm-hmm.
age or educational background or profession, it seemed to be this universal finding that in that hub of the wheel, as a
Mm-hmm.
metaphor, there was a continual unfolding of a feeling like it was almost like a different realm than the rim.
Yes.
So then I went on a journey to try to find some science that could correlate with it in a consilient way. So I reviewed all the brain science I could
Mm-hmm.
on, the studies of consciousness in the brain or meditation in the brain or all the attention in the
Yeah.
brain. And there wasn't anything that really correlated with it. And then I happened to be invited to teach at a conference for physicists on spirituality and science. So I
Mm-hmm.
would ask the physicists, like, since the proposal from decades earlier was, the mind is an emergent property of energy. And here I was hanging out with these experts on energy. I said, what is energy? And I'll never forget walking around this old monastery converted into a retreat center. Repeatedly, a number of physicists say exactly the same thing. Energy is the movement from possibility to
Mm-hmm.
actuality.
Yeah.
And so I mapped that physics notion onto the mathematical statement of basically the mind being a part of a complex system and emerging from it, and then looking at how that mapped onto the reports of the wheel of awareness practice, and then made a proposal, on what consciousness may come from and how
Yes.
that would relate to mental life. So that's to give you that quick
Yeah.
overview of how the wheel
The wheel of awareness.
wheel of
Yes.
awareness led to this accumulation of survey data that then could be correlated in a consilient way with the findings of the physics of energy, because I couldn't
Yeah.
see a direct correlation of neuroscience findings
Right.
that met what people were actually
Yeah.
subjectively experiencing.
I think it's a beautiful description. And now there are some neuroscience experiments. Some of them I've actually been a guinea pig in. Judd Brewer at Brown, who was at Yale at the time and did effortless awareness, and then has recently done one where when you become aware of awareness and then the awareness arises as movement and aliveness, they found that not only do you go on the EEG machine from beta to calm alpha, but you start to have synchronized gamma, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of an aha experience that these are people who are not 10,000 hour meditators, but just doing this technique similar to your wheel of awareness, where the other experiment by Zoran Josipovic at NYU was a group of us would do this meditation where, interestingly, it's like the wheel of awareness in that we go from one pointed attention, like a flashlight, then what I call a street light, which is mindful awareness, where you're observing from above. And then what you're observing is very similar, the four foundations of mindfulness: sensations, thoughts, and then feelings, which is feeling the relationship of the world, but then shifting from the content to the context of pure awareness, but not stopping at pure awareness, realizing that pure awareness is now arising as aliveness. And what they found is that the task mode network of the brain, which actually, when you do one pointed attention meditation, you actually suppress the default mode. And the reason you're calm is because you just have the task mode on. So, what this does is it balances task mode and default mode. So, the way you feel is this kind of seamless, interconnected, continuous field of embodied, interconnected piece, and your brain, which normally alternates between these two phases, actually synchronizes. And when you feel this, when you do this, it's like coming home. It's like being interconnected, like that client of mine who said, "It's me,"
Yeah. Well, it's so beautiful because there's so many consilient things you've just brought up for us, Locke.
Mm-hmm.
That's so great. One is one way of interpreting those gamma waves. It's the highest measure of
Mm-hmm.
integration in the brain is
Yeah.
gamma. So that's really exciting. The other is, that state where things are able to kind of come together in this synchronous kind of way. Amishi Jha, she and I
Mm-hmm.
were exploring, the ideas of the wheel of awareness and teaching together about what the hub might mean. And she had found that there was a way of doing a computer analysis of EEG findings in that open monitoring phase, which I think would be similar to this kind of state of just being aware of awareness. And in that EEG analysis, what they found was it correlated with the mathematically established statistical way in which the brain was least committed to doing anything. It was just ready for the most potentiality. And that, in fact, correlated with the, I think you pronounce his name, Cathart Harris's studies of what psychedelics do in his entropic brain hypothesis work. That would be consilient. All these things that would be consilient. And what I was fascinated with was in the survey of the Wheel of Awareness practice with these tens of thousands of people, they would say things like it's empty but full.
Yeah.
And so I knew some of those early research findings from the brain, and I couldn't figure out why they would say that was empty but full, or it was eternity, or it was love, or God.
Right.
So I went to physics, which for some of my neuroscience colleagues gets them really agitated. They would say, why won't you just stay with the brain? I say, well, first of all, I'm not sure the mind is only in the brain.
Right.
That's one thing. But the second thing is that I don't find the consilience that is needed to really correspond with all of these descriptions. But I think I have found a branch of science. And they go, well, there's no reason to have physics apply to mental life. I said, why wouldn't you? They said, then they say, well, because the mind is the brain. I said, hold on. The brain is just energy flow. So why not look at the bigger issue of energy flow by turning to physics? So I just want to say for all of us, it's a controversial point. But what I suggest is that mind actually is an emergent property of energy.
Yes.
Doesn't have to be limited to the head, number one. And when you look at what the physicists say, and when the first book I wrote in depth about this was called Aware, and the month before Aware was released, and I was nervous about it because I was having 100 pages to describe what I'm about to describe to you in a couple moments. The cover story of Scientific American was the topic of when the Newtonian realm meets the quantum realm. And that's what the 100 pages was all about. And I thought people were going to think I lost my mind. But I may have lost my mind, but at least it was consistent with what Scientific American was saying. So here's the way it goes, is that 350 years ago, Newton could figure out the mathematical properties that determined how these entities that were kind of like independent things, like you're there, I'm here, we are nouns, Locke is a noun, Dan is a noun. And that view of a noun-like entity existence has these qualities that Newton very carefully observed, mathematically described, and they're true. They're real for things larger than an atom, right? So they are absolutely true. When you get in a car, press on the brakes so you stop at a red light and you don't become one with everything. You want to actually not hit other things in the intersection. Right. But it turns out that 100 years ago, almost now, when they could study smaller things like an electron or a photon, the fundamental units of energy, which are called quanta. And what a quanta is totally weird, but it's a probability field. Now, for those people who don't like math and certainly don't like physics, this is going to sound strange. So you have to kind of feel your way into that because you live in a Newtonian large object body. You're used to perceiving the world through the Newtonian realm. But let me start with this analogy. We walk on land, and we know if we take a tennis ball, for example, and let it out of our hands, it will drop to the ground because gravity is a part of this Newtonian world we live in. It's nothing weird. It's exciting, and a baby has to learn it. But we also can learn to swim in a pool or a lake or a river. And if you have a tennis ball and you let it go out of your hands, it floats. The water realm, land, the air realm, are both part of our one reality. They just have different properties. And nobody that I've ever spoken to freaks out and says, Dan, Locke, oh my God, how can it be? There's a water realm and an air realm. This is impossible. No, it's just that there are different properties. So the quantum realm and the Newtonian or macro state realm are part of one reality.
Right.
And in the quantum realm, what the paper says and what all my colleagues as quantum physicists reassure me, because it's strange, is that, number one, the arrow of time, which is a directionality of change that exists in the macro state Newtonian realm, because of what's called the second law of thermodynamics. Things are all falling apart in that realm. It doesn't exist. The quantum realm is timeless. You don't need the time variable in any quantum equations. And they are even more accurate than Newtonian equations. So that's number one. It's timeless. That's what people described in the hub. Number two, and there's nothing in the brain studies that tells us why they would say that. The second thing is that the illusion of noun-like separation is true in the Newtonian realm. You know, you're there, I'm there. Maybe we're even interconnected. But in the quantum realm, there are no noun-like entities. There are just verb-like events. These probability fields are events. And they are massively connected to one another in something that I call intra-connection, I-N-T-R-A. There's a wholeness to the systems that are these events. So anyway, when I think what happens is, in the simple metaphor of the wheel, you're experiencing the rim-like elements that are Newtonian macro state realm stuff. They're all true and real. But when you give yourself the opportunity to go into the hub, you're actually dipping into the quantum realm. And when you do this from an energy point of view, you have this basically a diagram you can picture where when I say a word like ocean to you, it's like a peak on this diagram where of all the million words, let's say we had just a million, I said the word ocean, it's a peak where I've gone to an actuality. But if before I say all the word oceans, it's in a pool of a million possibilities. That pool in quantum physics is called, in poetic terms, the sea of potential, but in more mathematical terms, it's called the quantum vacuum. And it's basically where all possibilities are sitting before they are either turned into increased probabilities, which we call a plateau on the diagram, or an actuality like a peak. So if I were going to say one of the five oceans, it would be a plateau that only contained five things. And the probability there would be 20%, 1 out of 5 that you could guess it. So when you're down in that plane of possibility, it's the maximal uncertainty. And it looks like that's where consciousness, the experience of being aware, comes from.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, let's go a little deeper, because I think that's the transformative thing. I want to talk a little about pure awareness, or the plane of possibility, that when you're there and then you shift into that as the primary way of knowing. So from my experience, it's almost when you're looking at the wheel or living an ordinary life, you've actually created a little, I think, therefore I am, on the Newtonian level, an identity that's very kind of created itself, at least as a loop of thought going to thought, if not a subject, object, body, mind. So you're looking at, going around the wheel. And when you turn that awareness around, you let go not only of what you're looking at, but who's looking.
Totally.
So that you become an awareness-based being that is now experiencing humanness. So that is literally, I think, one of the most important, simple, radical practices in psychology, meditation, and it can be done in moments. And, my experience is 10,000 people have had also like their chronic pain go away. They're people who have done some of my just short practices on apps have said, I just did 3 of the practices and my life has changed. You can even ask my wife. So what is that? So I want to hear both a little report of because amazing that, strangers, non-meditators, people with no psychological consciousness exploring background can do this simple practice, which I call effortless mindfulness, which is moving from the content to the context, from focusing on movement to the timeless, boundless awareness that's not coming and going. And then it joins with what's coming and going, but stays in a new view. And so what is that? That is just remarkable how simple it is, how profound it is, and how it's accessible to so many.
Yeah, well, that's beautiful, beautiful work and a great contribution, Locke. What I would say from a Consilian point of view is that in this search to take, let's say, your experiences or the experiences that I've had, with people doing this workshop and the wheel of awareness practice, or your natural awareness experience of effortless awareness, really getting in this space. Here's what I think is going on. And, when I've written about it in Aware or the book Mind, it probably is why a number of people doing research on psychedelics have called me for private consultations about the mechanism that might be involved in why one, two, or sometimes at most three guided, carefully supervised psilocybin, treatment sessions are all that's needed to transform a life from intense anxiety, from depression, from people facing the panic of dying, trauma. And it turns out independently, this is exactly what the wheel has been good for clinically. So I was kind of like amazed. That's what we found in the late 90s and the 2000s. And then, 15 years later, as legally people were allowed to do research on these medications for medical purposes, for these psychiatric conditions, they were getting better. And the question was, what was going on? So what I've said to these folks calling me, and what I want to respond to your very powerful example, and we've had it the same thing with the wheel, is I think from an energy point of view, people live their lives with certain learned plateaus. If we can spend more time saying what that is.
Okay, sure.
But it basically is a subset of possible things. So if I have a depression plateau, it's I'm no good. There's no hope in life. There's no future. I'm helpless. I'm despairing. And that becomes a subset of all the possible things you could experience. That becomes kind of contained within this subset. That the peaks that arise from that subset will be emotions and memories and thoughts and interactions with others that are all coming from that limited subset, right? Just like only ocean names, only letters that begin with an O, even whatever it is. We call that a plateau. So when a plateau is very restrictive, it can lead to either chaos or rigidity, continually plaguing a person's life because it's impairing integration. That's the big picture. And the reason then that the effortless awareness, which sounds to me, Locke, and we said this when we were in Garrison, that it's basically identical to the hub.
Yes, absolutely.
And when I taught for a 2-day workshop with Dick Schwartz about internal family systems, in the end, when we had people do the Wheel of Awareness in that 2-day workshop, and then he said, this is identical to the capital S self. This bigger I that you were talking about before. I think these are all consilient. And it was kind of this beautiful moment because we need to be working together. The world has a lot of work to do. We don't need to have competing silos of my way is this way. So our job in interpersonal neurobiology is actually to be this big tent where we don't say we're a form of anything. We just inform stuff. And we want things to be overlapping and people to say, that sounds like what I'm doing. And we go, great. That's wonderful. So we don't feel competitive with anybody. We just want the world to be reducing the suffering and moving towards a regenerative world. So integration is the key. So integrating consciousness then allows you to differentiate this hub from the rim as a metaphor. It allows you to learn to not live in the plane of possibility, but live from the plane of possibility. What I mean by that is, like, if after listening to Locke and myself talk, you get in your car, you need to know you have a Newtonian body, and at the red light, stop. Use your Newtonian choice to have a plateau of car driving skill that says when there's a red light, put that foot on the brake, stop your car. And as we've joked about earlier, you will become one with everything. However, you also want, in an integrated way of differentiating, linking, to know you can drop into this plane of possibility. Whatever the practice you do, it could be, effortless awareness. It could be other ways in Buddhist practice. You do open monitoring. It could be the wheel of awareness where you get the hub. Let's assume for now, they're pretty much all the same thing. From the mechanism point of view, when we've said the mind is an emergent property of energy, what that means is you're along this distribution of probability curve. So let's say you are plagued with depression or plagued with anxiety, or someone sadly gave you a diagnosis, you're facing death. We're all facing death, but you got a diagnosis and you know when it's going to happen. All the terror would be experienced as plateaus with
Right.
particular peaks arising with fear and anxiety and sadness and anger, all the things that might be imprisoning you. When you drop into that plane, and I've had colleagues of mine and friends of mine terribly traumatized, couldn't get out of it, used psychedelics, 2 sessions, it's gone. And they come to me as my friends and I say, what's going on? I said, you've learned to access the plane. You don't need to keep on using that psilocybin to get there. It just taught you could do it, and it's natural in all of us. It's effortless for all of us. You just have to know the technique. For some of them, my friends, they do the wheel, and I do the wheel every day.
Yeah.
I get to the hub every day. I learn to live from the plane. You learn to love from there, because the main things that come out of the hub as a metaphor and the plane, this is strange, Locke. I'd love to know your thoughts on this, are connection, this open awareness, and love, which spells the acronym COAL, a different use of it than I've used it before. Connection. People feel connected to everything.
Yes.
Open awareness. They're receptive to anything. And love. There's this, I don't know if you've had that experience, but from your people who work with you, but love comes up over and over again. Some people say God, they say eternity, timelessness, empty but full. And all of these correlate, I think, to the incredible differentiation and linkage of potentiality in that plane of possibility that is the optimal integrated state. You see it reflected in these brain studies, but ultimately it's not just in the head, it's in the whole body, and it's not just limited by skull or skin, it's throughout the world, the reality. And in that sense, love is the vital force of the connectivity of all of life on earth, all of life in the world.
Yeah, the subtitle of my first book was The Art and Science of Open-Hearted Awareness. So that's the term I use for the final stage of pure awareness, moves to awareness, aliveness, unity, or integration, and then it naturally flowers into this interconnectivity that has these compassionate eyes or these feeling of non-separation. But to summarize, just because there's so many interesting things in the world and there's so many lenses to look at everything, but this one root thing to say that the root of consciousness is not thought, it's not conditioning, it's not control or replacing positive thinking with negative thinking. It's going to the root is this pure timeless awareness that then you don't stay there and you don't space out or like zone in or become a couch potato, or that staying home in the root of consciousness as awareness, it arises as interconnected aliveness and a particular human being, but the source or the identity has now shifted from thought-based to awareness-based knowing and being that flowers as a more grounded love and interconnection. So just that, those are a lot of words, even just to say, let awareness know awareness, and then as awareness, let it arise as and welcome everything.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And I think the consilient mechanism that may be a part of all that would be to say, that energy flow is reality.
Right.
And that what energy flow means is a position along a probability curve. And so that when you access effortless awareness in all those stages, including open-hearted awareness, and I'll suggest this to you, and you tell me maybe you don't resonate with it, but this is just what comes inside of, the reason I put ABCD in my little, screens is I realized I was putting Dan Siegel with capital letters. I said, no, I'll put lowercase letters like John A. Powell does to decrease the emphasis on individuality. And I said, well, that's even too much. So then I realized, well, I'll just put letters. And I realized ABCD stands for a body called Dan, So it's exactly like resonates, at least inside of this body. What you're saying is if energy flow is reality, and in this proposal, energy flow from a physics point of view means the movement along a probability curve from maximal uncertainty at the bottom to 100% certainty at the top. That's physicists agree that's the way to map it out. Then what we're saying is let's now take what physicists are saying, combine that with what mathematics says, which is that optimal flow of a complex system is to allow differentiation and linkage. Well, where do you get access to that? You get access to that where all the differentiated possibilities are sitting. Well, where are they sitting from a physics point of view? They're sitting in that sea of potential, what's called the formless source of all form. That's a physics statement. The formless source of all form.
That's right.
So then when someone learns to do effortless awareness, when they learn to do the wheel of awareness, when they learn to do whatever practice gives you the skill that any of us are capable of having, of tapping into, in a metaphoric way, the hub, then from a mechanism point of view, what I want to see how this feels for you is what it means is you've learned to let your energy flow, which is reality, drop into the plane, not be imprisoned by any particular plateaus of thought or noun-like illusion that you're a separate entity. But as David Bohm beautifully talked about, there's an implicate order that and I quoted him a bit in this book, intra-connected, where even beyond interconnected, where I'm connected to you, you're connected to me, it's intra-connected, where there's a wholeness. And then you realize that the node of your body, of the system, is just one way where from that plane of possibility, it's a portal through which integration arises. And then you realize you're dancing with energy. And one of the ways of describing it with a word is love. And that's where kindness and compassion just emerge from living from the plane. How does that resonate with you?
I would just probably emphasize the plane as the foundation that arises as energy. So starting from energy and returning to the quantum field, which is made of nothing. I have a friend who is a physicist at Stanford. I said, okay, so the quantum field is potentiality. It's nothing, right? I said, so what's a wave? What's that made of? Is that made of energy? He goes, not yet. It's nothing waving. And then he just kind of starts laughing and waving his hand, as that physicist kind of, ha ha, because it's still potential awareness, even as it forms into particle, wave, then energy. So the key thing that's been left out, I think many people can agree, of the energy, whether it's contracted energy or chaotic energy or rigid energy, or when it finds the pure awareness or the plane of possibility, that's the source that is both formless and then form.
Well, yeah, it's I think that's a really fascinating notion that you've got formlessness, where even the word note, it's nothing. If the word thing means an entity, then absolutely, even probability is not a thing yet. It's not an entity. Maybe once it's a peak, it becomes an entity, but it's in a probability state. It's not the plane, but it's not fully a thing. And this is where, since we live in bodies and we have language based on our body reality, we have words that are too nounified, especially Western words. In indigenous cultures, there are many more verbs in the language use. And even the systems thinking that's so beautifully a part of indigenous teaching is not a part of our Western thought. So this is this kind of wonderful thing of having consilience with, contemplative teaching, but also indigenous teachings. And, in sensing into the whole system as self, what an intraconnected view would be, it would be saying, yes, you are form and you are formless. You are the plane of possibility. You are plateaus. You are peaks. Here's the troubling experience we humans have is we begin to have conviction that those plateaus and peaks are all that's available to us. And one of the challenging moments that I've experienced as a therapist is for some people who've been traumatized, either literally in their family, they've had abuse or neglect, or they're traumatized by just living in modern society where they're told this lie that the self is a noun that's separate. That's also traumatizing. But in any event, uncertainty becomes the enemy. So even in school, if you think about it, you're in third grade on a spelling bee, and someone gives you a word and you can't really remember how to spell it. And you say, God, I'm not certain. You don't feel so good. And the teacher says, Danny, Lucky, why didn't you answer it this way? Right. So we're rewarded for certainty. But look at the map of this mechanism. It says that awareness, maybe, underscore a million times, this is just a hypothesis, but let's just go with it as if it were true, but maybe it's completely wrong. But if it's true, what it means is that awareness, pure awareness, natural awareness, effortless awareness, whatever you want to call it, this open, receptive place is identical with maximal uncertainty. So someone who's been taught that certainty is safe and survival based is going to be afraid of this open awareness because it's maximal uncertainties. So in the work therapeutically I do or in workshops, we come to this transition point where initially there may be plateaus of fear of going to that plane of possibility.
Yes.
But then we say, sure, because uncertainty is maximal down there. So you want to stay up in some belief system that you're in now.
Right.
But let's see what happens. And then they come to realize the synonym for maximal uncertainty is maximal freedom and possibility.
Right.
And then in the course of even just a workshop, they then transition to this incredible state of liberation and they become free.
Yeah, I think that's a very good explanation maybe to the question, if it's natural, why haven't more people realized it? And it's because of the fear of, conditioning that we've learned that we are a thing and we are a thinker and we are a body mind trying to survive and, as you say, have certainty and be safe and survive as a body, and then letting go. And the programs of the mind say, don't become nobody, don't lose your mind, don't let go of control. But those are the things that, in order to realize letting go into the timeless awareness that has no time and no certainty and nothing to hold on to or orient ourselves, it feels depersonalized or disassociated. In fact, it's just the opposite. It leads to, if you just stay there 1, 2, 3, and then let everything arise from it, then you do get the love and the connection. But it's that, and that's why the wheel of awareness is so brilliant, because it's almost like the TV show Columbo. It's like, oh, just be aware of your hearing, your thinking, and as long as you're here, look at the awareness in the hub. And then it's like,
exactly.
It's just like kind of like a quick, fun little, okay, this, that, this, that. Now just turn it back.
Well, I think that's why the wheel works so well, exactly like you're saying, is by the time you bend that spoke around, you've actually, you've explored all the sight and the sound, the hearing and all that stuff, the feelings in the body. Yeah. But what you always come back to, as you beautifully said, is you come back to the hub in the metaphor point of view. And then you realize that there's this kind of looping resonance between being in the plane of possibility and being aware of like an intention or a mood, which would be a plateau, or a particular thought or a particular memory or a particular emotion, which would be peaks, right? So you're kind of looping into this with a constant tapping into the plane and then being up on the plateau and peak and tapping into the plane. And then with the turning of the spoke around, you're no longer looping into that. You're kind of, if there's any loop, but it's probably no loop at all. You're just resting in the plane of possibility. And, I did this once in a parliament, and, during the break, this parliamentarian comes to me and says, Dr. Dan? I said, yeah. He goes, I didn't share during the sharing time. I said, yeah, I noticed. He goes, do you want to know why I didn't share? I said, sure. And his colleagues are on the other side of the room during the snack break. And he gets tears in his eyes and he goes, never before in my life, during that time he was talking about bending the spoke around into the hub, he goes, never before have I ever felt so much love. And now he's crying. And connected to everyone and everything, he says. Yeah. And then there's this silence between us. And so I said, wow, you felt love. He goes, so much love, so much love. And I go, and then we pause. And then I said, so you didn't want to share that with your colleagues? He goes, oh, no. If I say the love word, he goes, they would think I was weak.
Right.
So then there was this pause. Culture, and then I said to him, so let me ask you a question. He goes, what's that? I said, when you're making national policy, when you're making federal laws, are you leaving love out of the reasoning? And his eyes got really big, and he went over to chat up his parliamentarian colleagues. And we can only hope that he could realize the strongest thing in life is love. And that ability to drop into maximal uncertainty where love comes from, and to link through the plane of possibility
Mm-hmm.
means
That's
that
right.
you have this infinite source of potentiality there. And the thing that has been so powerful about saying, look, I know I'm a nerdy scientist, but I'm also a clinician and an educator, so I want to see what's
Right.
practical. This view of physics made
Yeah.
accessible, and I was so honored that my daughter drew out all these diagrams because I'm not a good
Uh-huh.
visual person, that you can actually see it, and you can see, I was lost in a plateau of this particular opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and I said X, Y, and Z that hurt someone's feelings or wasn't mindful of what it meant for them. I've got to drop into my plane. And when you realize that the plane of possibility is the portal through which
Yeah.
integration can naturally arise, then you don't have to make stuff happen. You let these experiences of love and connection emerge, like with that
Right.
parliamentarian. And this
Yeah.
is where, all of us in the space of saying there's a lot of suffering on the planet in
Yeah.
individuals, in couples, in families. With the pandemic, especially, there's been increased trouble with mental health. But even before the pandemic and after we have so many pandemics, the pandemic of social injustice, environmental
Mm-hmm.
destruction. These are all things I think are related to the lie of separation that comes from a
Yeah.
Newtonian way that we think the self is just your body.
Yes.
So
That's
just
right.
like I think the mind is not just your brain and your head, the self is not just your body. The self is, yes, an inner aspect to it. So we should use
Yeah.
a word like inner compassion rather than self-compassion,
Mm-hmm.
because the self is also your relationships with other humans all around this planet, our whole human family. And we're also siblings of all of life on Earth. So then you go, okay, so energy and information flow comes through the node of your body that you get about 100 years to live in. I don't know how it's been for you, Locke, but for me,
Yeah.
one of my parents died in the
Mm-hmm.
course of exploring all this stuff. Another parent is very
Yeah.
old. But
Yeah.
even for my own existential issues of facing
Sure.
death, I have felt this incredible transformation of my own anxiety about it
Yeah.
when I feel into that plane of possibility and know that that's actually the base of everything. The body gets about 100 Newtonian years to live, but
Mm-hmm.
dropping back into that plane of possibility is like going back home.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I think there's, as you said, that's a beautiful story about the parliamentarian and, how simple this is that, in one of the most ancient wisdom texts called The Secret of the Golden Flower, which is a Taoist text. What is the secret of the golden flower? Turn the light of awareness around. That is the
Mm.
sublime truth. That's it.
Wow.
That's the
Wow.
secret. That's the secret.
Wow.
But that secret is like so simple, but it brings us to love. It lets flower what we've been searching for all along. And the amazing thing is it's inherent within us, but it requires that word of letting go, surrendering, unhooking, that is the scary part from the control and from the certainty. But once you've tasted it and it's described the way you describe it and others in whatever language people like, it's the direct experience like that parliamentarian that it gives them, this fullness from the emptiness, right?
Well, exactly. And that's so beautiful. I've never heard that quote before. So this is a good
Mm,
example of consilience and why,
mm,
collaborating and joining together. I'd love to get that from you. And, the thing
yeah,
that's so exciting too about it is from a long time ago, and this is something you hear and you think it's just some kind of platitude
mm,
when people say it's just in you, turn the light of
right,
attention, the focus of attention
yeah,
inward to the source of awareness.
yeah,
So what I hope the journey as a scientist of bringing this mechanism of probability is, even though I know some people, they don't like diagrams, they don't like math. So
yeah.
I've tried to make it as accessible as possible. But what it
Some
allows you to
people
do,
do.
well, some people do. But for me to try to understand what's actually
Yeah,
going on, let's say even in that Taoist text, what's so
yeah.
helpful for me, and this may be my own particular, penchant to want to understand stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
is that you learn that, okay, it's not just a platitude. It's
Exactly.
literally,
Yes. Literally. Yeah.
you are this manifestation of actuality
Yeah,
through probability from possibility. And when you
exactly.
start living with that for a while, initially, my students who come to the
Hmm.
Mindsight Institute and we explore this in depth, when they do this, initially it's like, what is he talking about? That's nutty. That's nutty. And then I get these emails. Oh my God, I got it. I was doing the
Right.
wheel and I've been reading this stuff about the plane of possibility. Now I
Yeah.
got it. And there's this huge smile on their face. Or as one person in a workshop said, that she had fallen to pieces,
Hmm.
but now is at peace.
There you
And,
go.
and throughout the
Hmm.
workshop, her best friends were there with her. I said, well, how's she doing? How's she doing? They go, we've never seen her like this after a
Hmm.
25-minute practice, because you could say, well, that's magical. Well, no, it's not magical. It's
No.
certainly mystical in the sense that mysticism is, this deep state of awe that some people describe. And I had
Yeah.
a colleague who called himself a mystic, John O'Donohue. And I
Hmm.
said,
Yes.
John,
I know John.
he used to say about being a mystic,
Hmm.
he would say it's someone who believes in the reality of the invisible. Well, the plane of
Yeah.
possibility is literally invisible, and yet it's
Yes.
real. They get into these mystical states, and these are
Yeah.
transformative because they're filled with awe.
In some ways, you could call it mystical, or maybe it was studied by religious people, then spiritual people, then meditators and consciousness. But it really is just simply, if you really strip it of all explanation, it's available, it's inherent, it's invisible, timeless, but intelligent and awake and interconnected. And those are the words that people use, throughout cultures in the world. As I travel around Europe and Asia, I'll lead some of these things without telling them what the result is. I won't lead the witness,
Sure,
with what it's about. And then, but they come up with what I call popcorn awakenings. Each person all of a sudden is speaking like Lao Tzu, or like, you
totally.
know, uh, and that's the amazing thing, that maybe my thought is it's the next natural stage of human development.
Well, I think so, because especially when you see the result of not having this development is the
Yeah.
modern view of separation. I
Yes,
think
exactly.
indigenous teachings were conciliant with are conciliant with contemplative teachings, but modern teachings are not that way. Instead of being like a systems viewer, where I'm
Hmm.
a fundamental part of a system, this is more like the separation, of modernity, of modern contemporary times. So the next stage in human evolution not only hopefully will be, but when you look at the destruction of life on Earth and the incredible racism and social injustice,
Hmm.
you can say that these are actually caused by the illusion of a separate self. Now, that's contemplative
Yes.
teaching, that's
Yeah,
indigenous teaching.
that's right.
From a scientific point of view, we can say you're lost in the Newtonian appearance
Hmm.
of being a noun-like entity or entities that are separated, driven by evolutionary based in-group, out-group distinctions, especially under
Hmm.
threat. So we must use consciousness
That's
to
right.
allow a more integrative self to emerge, where you realize I'm a me in a body, yes. I'm a we in
Hmm.
relationships, and the intra-connected identity then would be to
That's right.
integrate those as me plus we. And then you said it earlier, Locke, MWE, MWE. MWE is the word we
Yes.
use,
Right.
and we try to collect this from all over the world. How you would say this, because it's not just going from individualism to collectivism, but
No.
to actually allow an honoring of the inner experience, an
Yeah.
honoring of the inter experience, and realize together they're the intra-connected experience.
Yeah, that's a beautiful place for us to end. But before we do, I'd like wondering if you might say a little about some of your upcoming programs and where people might find you.
Sure. Well, at the Mindsight Institute, which is a website, mindsightinstitute.com, or drdansiegel.com, without any periods before the .com, DRDAN Siegel.com. You can find all sorts of ways of exploring stuff, doing the Wheel of
Mhm.
Awareness, or you can take our comprehensive courses. We have a 36-hour course. And then once you complete the 36-hour course, then you're invited to join what's called a community of practice. So we have basically an interpersonal neurobiology community where, I meet regularly with the community members, and people are able to have groups where they're able to facilitate on this platform ways of communicating. And we have people from all walks of life. We have 75 different countries represented. We have, a diversity of racial backgrounds, gender identity backgrounds. We have people from every profession you can imagine, educational level. We have work for professionals. We have work for people who are struggling with parenting and trying to see how to teach parenting issues. So there's a whole bunch to do there, and I welcome everyone to come join us.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. This has really been a joy. I love riffing with you in the jazzy way, and really having that conciliation of connection.
It's beautiful, Loch. I feel the same way, and thank you so much for the honor of being with you. It's really been fantastic. Thank you.
Right, thanks now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
This practice can help you shift out of your chattering mind and into a more open mind. To begin, sit in a comfortable way and simply close your eyes while allowing your awareness to remain open. Take a couple of slow, easy breaths at your own pace. And feel your breath moving within your body. Feel your whole body from within while noticing that your breathing is happening by itself. Be easy and comfortable and relax while remaining alert. And take a moment to see what is here now. Notice how your body is feeling. Is it uncomfortable, comfortable, agitated, relaxed, tired, in pain, or neutral? Just be aware of how your body's feeling without trying to change it. Just be aware of it as it is. Now, simply shift to be aware of what is feeling the sensations in your body. Feel the awareness in which these sensations are happening. Rather than being aware of sensations, feel the space and the awareness that is aware of them. Shift from the content to the context. Notice that the awareness is not tired, not in pain, not agitated or anxious. Feel how this awareness is both all around and within your body. Feel the relationship from this awareness to sensations and thoughts without blending with the content. Now notice the activity of your mind and thoughts. Just be aware of whether your thoughts are agitated, calm, tired, emotional, anxious, or neutral. Without changing anything at all, allow your mind and thoughts to be as they are. Now shift to notice the space in which thoughts are moving. Be interested in the awareness instead of the thoughts. What is aware of the thoughts? Shift to notice not just the content, but the context. Feel the awareness that is wordlessly aware. Notice how awareness allows your mind to be as it is. Begin to notice that awake awareness is alert, clear, and non-judgmental. And feel that this awareness is not tired or anxious and has never been in pain. Notice the awareness is all around and inherent within your body and within your mind, arising as your sensations and thoughts. Notice the sounds that you're hearing, and then shift to notice the awareness of the next sound. Does the awareness have a location or a size, or is it open? What is it like to be aware of any experience from this pain-free, spacious awareness? Just curiously inquire, am I aware of this spacious awareness? Or what's it like when I'm aware from this spacious awareness as this spacious awareness, which is welcoming thoughts, feelings, and sensations? And now curiously notice, is this awareness like the sky? Or is it more like the ocean, arising as energy, sensation, your body, and the world? Notice whether you feel the connection between the context and the content. Notice the awareness that doesn't come and go, arising as the content, which changes moment to moment. Simply let be and remain uncontracted and undistracted, naturally welcoming without effort. And as we end this practice, you can feel all your senses open. As you open your eyes and notice what it's like to see from this more awareness-based, open mind. Okay. And as you transition, just continue to be aware from here. And during your day, when you recognize you're lost in thought, know that this recognition is the beginning of awakening. Instead of judging yourself for being re-identified, just say to yourself, no big surprise, just re-recognize, and then return here with a glimpse. Enjoy. Thanks so much for joining me today in my dialogue with Dan Siegel. If you enjoyed today's episode, rather than asking for a donation, would you please leave us a rating and a review on your podcast app? Ratings and reviews are really the best way to help us reach more listeners. And also, if you want to go deeper into the practice of effortless mindfulness, I'm offering a live 6-week course called An Introduction to the 5 Levels of Mind. This is the first in a series of 3 training courses that will culminate in an Effortless Mindfulness Facilitator certification. If you're interested in joining me, please head over to lochkelly.org to learn more. And until then, be well.